The story begins in New York City, where a young woman named Lucy Kelson lives in a modest apartment and is actively engaged in legal work related to historic preservation and environmental issues. Her parents have to constantly bail her out of jail when she runs afoul of the authorities. She devotes her time to community organizations and fights against the demolition of old buildings for commercial development. One such development turns out to be a community center in the Coney Island neighborhood that she has known since childhood. This center is especially dear to her because she spent a lot of time there as a child, and now she is going to save it from demolition. At the same time, the line of a billionaire named George Wade is developing. He is one of the owners of a construction corporation, rich, spoiled, and used to a luxurious life. He lives in a penthouse, leads a carefree lifestyle, and is rarely interested in the consequences of his business decisions. His main occupation is entertaining and superficial business meetings. At the same time, his company begins a search for a new general counsel as his current attorney quits. Howard Wade is George's brother, and Helen is his first and real wife, controlling the firm's firmware. Howard is angry at George for losing good business deals, as George continues to hire models as attorneys who don't know how to do their jobs. Howard gives George an ultimatum to hire a real lawyer within 24 hours. Chance brings Lucy and George together as she tries once again to stop the destruction of the building that houses the community center. She shows up at an event associated with George's company and voices her grievances about the impending demolition, but Lucy guarantees the project to Wade if he promises to save the center. Discovering that she is a graduate of the prestigious Harvard Law School, he tries to hire her to replace his old chief counsel, disregarding their opposing views on real estate development. In return, he promises to provide funds to support her favorite community projects and save the community center from demolition. She decides that the benefits he offers for discretionary funding for community causes she supports outweigh the negatives, especially since he promises to protect the community center. Lucy agrees to the offer, expecting that her work for the corporation will benefit the community and help protect important facilities from destruction. However, from the very beginning, it becomes clear that George expects much more than professional legal assistance. He begins to turn to her with a variety of issues that go far beyond work, including clothing choices, personal matters, household problems, and even leisure activities. Lucy becomes increasingly involved in his personal life, accompanies him to events, solves for him not only legal issues, but also issues of everyday life. George quickly gets used to her help and begins to depend on her opinion in all situations. He calls her day and night, demanding advice and help on the smallest of occasions. She soon discovers that what he really needs is advice in all aspects of his life: what design, stationery, a mattress for the house. Within a few months, she unfortunately becomes his indispensable assistant, and he calls her for every little thing at any time. Lucy manages to negotiate a very good divorce settlement with George's ex-wife, but George steps in and gives her what she wants despite the fact that she cheated on George. Lucy feels that George is not letting her do her job. During one of these situations, Lucy finds herself at her friend's wedding when she receives a call from George with another question about what he should wear to the big event. She then decides that she is no longer willing to put up with his constant dependence and disregard for her time. She informs George of her decision to quit and sets her resignation period at 2 weeks. However, her departure is not so simple. After that, Lucy starts looking for a new job at other law firms. She attends interviews, sends out resumes, but encounters an unexpected problem. George secretly calls these firms and asks them not to hire Lucy because he hopes to persuade her to stay at his firm. He doesn't immediately realize how much he depends on her presence until he realizes that he can't find a worthy replacement for her. Lucy begins to look for jobs at other companies, but all are turned down because George warned them in advance to keep her with him. George reminds them that Lucy drew up her own contract, stating that she would work for him until the Coney Island project was completed. Her parents, also lawyers, confirm that the contract is immutable. Lucy decides to quit, but acts impulsively without thinking of the consequences for Howard and George. Eventually, George relents, and she agrees to help him find a replacement. However, they do not realize how close and dependent on each other they have become. At the restaurant, they carry on a conversation like an old married couple, unwittingly exchanging food, knowing each other's tastes. She begins to look through candidates, selecting resumes and conducting interviews, trying to find a person who can take over her duties. However, George shows complete passivity in this process and is not in a hurry to approve her choice. Lucy talks to her, but expresses doubts about June's lack of real estate experience. However, as soon as George sees June, he is immediately interested in her and is willing to hire her without hesitation, which doesn't seem to bother Lucy much. Instead of just ignoring what is happening and letting her boss handle his questionable hiring practices, Lucy becomes increasingly anxious and feels competitive pressure as she feels her place being threatened. At one of the tennis matches where she and June have been exchanging blows, the tension between them becomes even more apparent. When George invites June to attend business social events that only Lucy has attended before, such as a charity event, Lucy begins to see these events as a sort of date night and wonders why June is increasingly invading her social circle. She begins to feel alienated and unrequited. George spends more and more time with June, and Lucy notices that she is increasingly sidelined. Lucy discovers that, despite George's promise, the community center is going to be torn down to build a new apartment complex. Shocked, she goes to the hotel where George lives to confront him about breaking his promise and tell him that the center has caused construction costs to spiral out of control. She arrives at his hotel to confront him and finds June and George in his apartment in their underwear during a strip game. George confronts her the next day, her last day, where Lucy reminds him that he promised her he would spare the community center. Lucy leaves after George accuses her of being a saint, making everyone else look bad because they are human beings who make mistakes. The next day, George finds Lucy to discuss what happened. It happens on the day of her last day of work. Lucy reminds him of his promise to save the community center and leaves his office, refusing to continue to cooperate. After she leaves, George begins to realize that her presence in his life has meant much more to him than he realized and that he needs to change. He realizes that he has become dependent not only on her professional help, but also on her company. He makes the decision to remedy the situation and keeps his original promise to keep the community center open.
Meanwhile, at her new job at a law firm, Lucy finds herself missing him and feeling uncomfortable. She notices that even though she is now free from George and his constant requests, she misses spending time with him. He decides to find Lucy and inform her that he has decided to keep his promise and refuse to demolish the community center. He arrives at her house and explains that he has made this decision. Lucy refuses him at first, but then returns and, without hiding her feelings, stays with him. George announces that he has resigned. George and Lucy have a wedding ceremony at the very community center they saved together. Their friends and families gather for the wedding, and their new life begins. Lucy orders takeout in her apartment, and George jokes about the size of the apartment. Usually when she orders and is asked how much, Lucy replies 1, but this time, with a sly smile, Lucy replies, "It's for 2."